What we have here is the Etareta or Etareta. I'm not really sure how to pronounce it, and I can't really find any explanation or pronunciation guides on how to say this word. So in any case, this is a small camera made in Czechoslovakia. It's a 35 millimeter camera, scale focus, and it's fairly simple. I'm not really sure when this camera was made. It was produced, well, nobody's really quite sure of how long this camera was produced. This was among the MKII cameras. Mostly that company is known for producing a line of well-regarded Flexaret twin lens reflex cameras. Czechoslovakia has a bit of a complicated history. It was created in 1918 after it broke away from the Austro-Hungarian Empire. That's right, I believe it was called the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Anyway, it broke away from that in 1918 and formed the independent country of Czechoslovakia. Later, it became a target of Hitler, who effectively took over the country. His goal was to actually exterminate the Czech people. And I believe a good number of them died in German concentration camps. After World War II, it was really taken over by communists and then became part of the Warsaw Pact of Nations, otherwise known as, often just referred to as the Soviet bloc of nations. In 1968, it tried to do some liberalizations of its society and was promptly crushed by the Soviets, moved in tanks with the help of other Eastern European nations. And then it remained under fairly tight communist control until 1989, which is when the Berlin Wall fell. And then soon after we saw the dissolution of the USSR, Czechoslovakia returned to democratic rule, or democratically elected rule, November of 1989. And then 3 years later, on the last day of December 1992, Czechoslovakia peacefully split into two sovereign countries known as the Czech Republic and Slovakia. That was sort of the history of that country in a nutshell. I grew up in Pittsburgh, and there were a lot of Slovaks there, and there was often a little running joke, and it was just, "Are you Slovak?" And if you know what the meaning of that is, be sure to let me know in the comments below. When we think of Czechoslovakia, we often think about and it's often known for its artists, I think its poets, its writers, but we don't usually turn our thoughts to photography. And because it was an Iron Curtain country ruled by communists, in general, there probably wasn't a great deal of focus, budget-wise or anything else, on the arts. And so photography, probably I think it made cameras for the masses. It wasn't really interested in, making a lot of cameras for export, at least certainly not to the degree of what occurred in Germany or in the Soviet Union. So let's get back to this camera. This is a fairly simple scale focus camera. As you can see, it actually has a collapsible lens. And we've seen that on a number of cameras, so so it's not a novel feature. We have seen collapsible lenses on certainly other German cameras and as well as Japanese cameras. And specifically, the two that I'm thinking about are the Konica 1 and 2. So to extend the lens, you simply pull it out. I mean, it doesn't lock when it's in this position, and as you can see, it simply falls out if you turn it upside down. So to extend the lens, you pull it out and you turn it counterclockwise to lock it into place. The one thing that's a bit unusual about this camera is collapsing the lens. Although it's somewhat easy to open and extend the lens and lock it into place, collapsing the lens actually takes quite a bit of effort. It's just not a simple matter of just taking it and twisting it with your fingers. You really have to grab it tightly, turn it to the right, and then it will collapse into place. Up on the top deck, there are a ton of controls. Here's your rewind knob. This is your frame counter, and it has a little knurled post in the center, little dial, or not really a little dial, a little knurled post that allow you to turn that dial and reset the frame counter. This is your rewind button. And I believe it's also linked to the film advance. So after you take a shot, I believe you press this, turn a little bit until, and then continue to turning the knob until it locks into place for the next shot. The, the shutter itself is fairly basic, or the lens shutter assembly is fairly basic. This is a scale focus camera. There's no rangefinder built in, so you really just guess on your focus. I would assume that this was meant for the European market, as all the distances are marked in meters. It has a modest range of shutter speeds, running from 1/10 on up to 1/200th of a second and B, but it also has a T setting, and that's not something you often see. However, I think production began either immediately before or immediately after World War II. Let me take a quick look. So apparently production began possibly in 1943, which would be before the end of World War II. I think this is an uncoated lens. I haven't really been able to see one way or the other, but it appears to be an uncoated lens. However, there's always a possibility that it's a single coated lens. It's in pretty good shape, and I think the reason it's in good shape is because the lens is really recessed. Some cameras have that lens, that front element right up front, and right up front where it can get scratched easily. This one, it's recessed a bit, so it has that added benefit of protecting that front element. Your aperture selector is here, and you can see the small pointer, and you simply push that to and fro to your desired aperture. This is a 50 millimeter lens, or 5 centimeter lens. Generally, but this is mostly true with the German cameras. Generally, lenses before the end of World War II were marked in centimeters, and after World War II were marked in millimeters. However, in other countries, that wasn't necessarily true. So that is just a guide, mostly, I think, for German cameras. As I mentioned, this has a standard 5 centimeter lens, and it's f3.5. Apertures run from 3.5 all the way down to, I think it's f16. The numbers are marked in red, so I'm actually having a little bit of trouble seeing them because they're really marked in a faded red. Let's take a quick look. Apertures run from 3.5 down to f16. There are 2 controls on the front in addition to your focusing ring. Here, this is your lever that tensions the shutter, and this is your shutter release. So it is possible to take multiple shots on one frame. And so when you don't have a shutter release lock, what you do is you get into the habit, or you decide beforehand that as soon as you take a photo, you're going to wind on to the next frame. And once you get into that habit, then you always know that you're ready to shoot another photo, because otherwise you're left in that position of wondering, did I wind to the next frame or did I not? In the back is your eyepiece, and if you think that's tiny, you're right, it is. It's very tiny. However, you can see through it. So, I mean, I was able to see through it without any difficulty. Of course, I don't wear eyeglasses, so, that I was able to get my eye closer to this little eyepiece. There's not much else. On the bottom is your tripod socket, and it is in alignment with the center of the lens. You pop open the back by simply pushing this little button and pulling the back open. Let's take a real quick look here. So we have our pressure plate, and of course the role of the pressure plate is to keep the film flat against the film rails here. So that way, when you take your photo, you get as sharp as photo as possible because your film is as flat as it possibly can. Keep in mind that there's always going to be some curvature of the film, and so that's often why people recommend not shooting at the maximum aperture, but for most shots, taking them at like 5.6 or even f8. Here's your sprocket wheel, and this, of course, engages with the sprocket holes in film. Your take-up spool's over here, no surprise, and here is the chamber for your fresh roll of film. it pops up to make it easier, or in fact to make it possible to load the film into the camera. If this didn't pop up, you probably wouldn't be able to get a roll film into the camera. One interesting thing about this is when the back is closed, the seams on this are so tightly fit. It makes me wonder if this actually was one piece of aluminum, or how they were able to get that to such an exact fit. So in most cameras, as you know, the back will have some overhang. This one, there really isn't any overhang. The back will have some overhang, and then it will then wrap into the body. With this one, it's interesting how this really almost seamlessly matches up with the top and bottom trim. This camera is finished in a handsome cloth covering, black covering. I thought it was leather, but now that I run my fingers against it, I think it's just a very textured cloth, almost like a muslin, but not positive about that. That's what it feels like. The camera itself is in pretty good shape, as you can tell. I didn't have to do a whole lot of work. I think I might have cleaned up the shutter, and obviously I cleaned the lens surfaces in the viewfinder. There are no frame lines in the viewfinder, and that's not a surprise considering that this camera was introduced in the 1940s, and I can't think of any camera manufacturer at the time that was putting frame lines into the viewfinder. Of course, there probably is a maker that did, and so, once again, I'll probably have egg on my face making that statement. This camera itself is, as you can tell, it's rather petite. Fits easily, it sort of disappears in when I hold it in two hands, so, it doesn't even extend past the palm of either hand when they're put together. Oh, you know what? Let's take a look and see what this camera weighs. £1, 0.3 ounces, or really 1 pound. So there's not a whole lot of weight to this camera. That doesn't really surprise me because it actually feels rather lightweight. I recall shooting some film with this camera. I couldn't find the photos, so it makes me wonder if I processed the photos. I do remember scanning the negatives and then looking at the photographs, so I'm not really sure what happened to that roll of film. Or perhaps maybe I'm just imagining that I shot a roll of film with it. Who's to say? I think I bought this, I want to say, maybe around 2009, 2010, something like that. So not entirely positive about that. Regarding this camera, there's very little written about it. I really only found one article about this camera, and I'll provide a link to it below and you can take a look for yourself. I wrote about this camera on my own site. I looked at my review yesterday. I realized that really I hadn't written much about it because I just don't know much about this camera. So what's my overall rating for this camera? I gave this camera an 8.7, and you can take a look at the where I scored it. In general, I think it does a pretty good job of being a camera, which is really what you want. I don't think it excels at anything, but it doesn't really fall short in any way. It does what you ask it to do, which is to take photos and not be overly complicated, and so on that merit, it certainly succeeds. You don't see these turn up that often on eBay. I'm sure this is where I bought this camera. You just don't see it turn up that often. It doesn't mean that it's rare. It might mean that it's slightly uncommon, but some cameras, they just don't pop up that often, and this is one of them. By the way, if somebody knows how to pronounce the name of this camera, whether it's Etareta or something else, please let me know. I'm always more than happy to be corrected about that. That and many other things. And so that will wrap up this video. Here we have the Etareta, a small scale focus 35mm camera made in Czechoslovakia and hailing from the 1940s. In the article that I'll be linking to, it does mention that this camera was produced by 3 different companies. So if you enjoyed this video, please think about hitting that like and subscribe button. And if you have a question or a comment, or you'd like me to take a look at another camera in the future, let me know in the comments below, or send me an email at contact@camera-talk.net. And hope to see you on the next video.